Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video we'll be taking our almost weekly look at Prime Minister's questions from yesterday with Keir Starmer for Labour and Ian Blackford for the SNP. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the proceedings got off to a good start because the Speaker announced the beginning of PMQs and the PM wasn't there, wasn't actually there. Then he came hurriedly in to try and answer his question. I wouldn't have thought the first question even was a good start for Johnson either. It came from a Conservative backbencher, and it was talking about promised investment in his constituency being pulled. And he asked the Prime Minister to throw the weight of his government behind efforts to get the company to change its mind. Do the right thing, as he said. And I'm thinking to myself, hang on a minute. Aren't Conservatives free market capitalists? If a private company feels that for whatever reason, and I'm not going to blame Brexit, might not be Brexit, it may just be general Conservative incompetence, or it may be something else. But if they feel that for whatever reason the market conditions have changed and they need to change their investment plans, don't Tories generally believe that that's up to them and nothing to do with the government? I mean, small government and all that. Apparently not when it might be a seat that Labour want to grab back from the Conservatives in 2024, perhaps. Actually, that reminds me, I need to discuss elections in the Red Wall quite soon now. I think I may have to do that tomorrow. But anyway, PMQs. Shall we go through this week's Prime Minister's lies then? So, the general feel actually, particularly with the Starmer-Johnson questions, is rather sombre. It was a rather sombre Q&A on, very topically of course, violence against women. And Johnson said that his government was working hard to speed up the CPS, Crown Prosecution Service. In fact, they're working to slow it down. You know, Conservative MPs, and yesterday was no different, they're constantly trying to push the line. Oh, the pandemic has caused this build-up of cases and we're working really hard to get through it. But you know, the pandemic caused some build-up of cases. But the vast majority of delays were there before the pandemic. The government had closed down courtrooms, closed down police stations, cut back on police numbers. All of this has led to huge delays in the criminal justice system. It was there before the pandemic. And it often means that victims go without justice as too much time passes before cases are heard. And this is particularly true of the particular crimes that were being discussed at PMQs yesterday, in particular male violence against women. Johnson also tried to suggest that Labour were not supporting measures against these injustices because they were voting against the new policing bill, which came up later on. Starmer said, well, he said, I'll come to that later, but he also said the bill says more about protecting statues than protecting women. And the thing is as well, Starmer, of course, ideally placed to talk about these matters with his experience in the Crown Prosecution Service. The interesting thing is that although Johnson continued to try and push his dystopic policing bill, he was actually quite reserved in his responses. He usually likes to try and play to what little crowd is allowed these days. He's obviously been advised that this is not a topic to adopt his usual manner on. You know, he's getting his dreadful human rights abuse laws through. They're happening, that's going to happen. Not a single Conservative the night before rebelled against it. But they won't be popular. So he's probably toning it down for that reason, deliberately to make less of an issue of it. You know, Conservatives are quite keen on making public enemies of different groups of people, and they will pick different groups of people. You know, divide and rule and all that. It's tricky to do with women though, isn't it? You can't really do it with women because it's a group of people he cannot attack in this way. And so, because he's no minority, you know, he has little notion of how to respond to questions like this because he cannot make victims of some groups and make enemies of other groups. Not when this is you know, concerned. So all he could do was blather on about his bill and how, you know, it means you get 10 years in prison if you peacefully protest. Oh wait, he didn't mention that. That's just what is in the bill. As if that somehow stops male violence against women. oh, well, what we're going to do, we're going to get people protesting against the government. If they're too noisy, in other words, if we can hear them, we're going to throw them in prison for 10 years. That should sort out violence against women, shouldn't it? Starmer reminded the Prime Minister that on the subject of a victims law. So as soon as he came into Parliament, you know, with his experience as a prosecutor, put forward the idea of a victims law. You know, Labour have been trying to push this ever since. The Conservatives, Starmer noted, have promised to introduce such a thing. This isn't just something that the Conservatives are going, oh, no, we don't need this. They've promised it in the last 3 manifestos, but it has yet to appear. In another response, you know, Starmer also had to remind Johnson that, hang on, I was actually Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years, you know. I was responsible for prosecuting the country's most serious crimes, and that he didn't need to be told how the system works by the Prime Minister. Now, this PMQs wasn't a barnstormer, as you could probably guess at this point, like the last two, or on many occasions last year, or like they will be again. It wasn't one that makes Johnson look stupid. It wasn't one that exposed some lies, but again, it wasn't one to make him look really silly with those exposure of lies. It was Starmer discussing an area of prior professional interest and something that he's extremely knowledgeable about, and people will understand that he's knowledgeable about it, and pointing out the practical steps that the government could take to deal with the problems. Now, from a party political point of view, you could argue, so what is the point of this PMQs? Because it's not going to change government policy. You could argue that what he'll be doing is banking the responses from the Prime Minister, and in a few years' time, when it's general election time, highlight how the government haven't actually made progress yet again. He will point out that the government have made promises to introduce various laws, and do you know what? Yet again, they haven't. Well, do you know what? With Labour, we actually will. One advantage of having a top prosecutor as Labour leader is that we should absolutely be able to bang the law and order credentials for the party at the next general election. Which is too often, and I don't get this, a bit like the economy. It's too often safe ground for the Conservatives, and you think, how? They actually help the criminals. I mean, I get that you look after your own, but they take the piss. But Starmer's penultimate question, I thought, oh, this is risky. I thought this could go badly wrong. So he decided to talk about the need for tougher sentences for the most serious forms of sexual violence. The Tory backbenchers couldn't contain themselves. You could hear them. You know, they couldn't believe their luck. I can't believe Starmer's asked that. Oh, this is going to be easy. Johnson couldn't believe his luck either. He even adopted some rare sarcasm. He says, well, if only there was some sort of bill that would do this. Oh, wait, there is. You voted against it. Alluding to his policing bill that doesn't do this at all. You know, the bill that is all about criminalising peaceful protest to avoid embarrassing the government, who are clearly intent on stepping out on our throats over the next few years, because that's what this bill is for. They know that the public are going to want to protest about what they have done, what they are doing, and what they still intend to do. They want to frighten enough people so they don't see the million people marches again. They also won't care if, in the absence of legal peaceful protest, a small number violently protest. I mean, that'd be brilliant for them, because then they get to look tough on crime by sending in wave after wave of police officers to crack their skulls. But the question was very risky. It could have been stupid. I mean, if it had been his last question, it would have been ridiculous, but it wasn't going to be his last question. He isn't actually stupid. Because, you know, most people wouldn't be aware of that. What it allowed Johnson to do was to go, well, we've got this bill here. Labour are opposing it. They say they want tougher sentencing. We've got this bill that gives tougher sentencing, and they're voting against it. You know, this is a bill that exists to try and help women facing violence from especially men, and they're voting against it. But of course, it wasn't the final question. It was a set-up question. You know, because as I say, it would have been stupid to the final question. And I guessed, you know, that when he asked it, I said it was risky. I think it was risky. And I'm not sure, you could argue for and against whether the payout was worth it. Obviously, the Starmer was after that specific reaction, only to slam it down hard with his final question, which in reality was a final response. Now, it did expose it, because Starmer then made clear that the bill that Johnson refers to means you get a longer prison sentence for damaging a statue than you do for raping a girl, for example. But here's the thing. On the one hand, sure, he's highlighted that Johnson's bill means you get a weaker sentence for sexual violence than damage to a statue. Yes, most people will see that as not getting your priorities right. Did he really expose just how weak the bill is simply by making the statement about priorities being all wrong? I'm not sure. To a non-critically thinking person, I'm just not sure. Technically, this was a case of seeding what looked like a soft question and getting Johnson to fall into a trap, which he duly did. Starmer finished by exposing the lie in Johnson's response, because he pointed out that the bill doesn't actually toughen sentences for these acts of violence at all. The Prime Minister saying, oh, well, this bill introduces tougher sentences for these crimes. It does not. Not a single word. And it's not just that it toughens them a little bit, but then has this huge, ridiculous penalty. Like, literally, the aim of this bill is if you were to congregate outside the House of Commons, or the Palace of Westminster really, but where the House of Commons is based, with a megaphone, you want to protest, or to the Prime Minister as he drives past, or he's driven past, you can get 10 years in prison. If you daub graffiti on a statue, which I'm not saying I'm in favour of, but if you do, you get 10 years in prison. But, serious sexual violence against a girl, no, the sentence is nowhere near like that. Yes, that's priorities all wrong. Is that a clear enough reason for a non-critically thinking person to really oppose the bill? Because they might think, well, it's still tougher sentences for those, even if you've got silly sentences for these other things. But, Starmer was making it clear it doesn't even toughen those sentences. So, not sure. Not sure. The reality, of course, and Starmer will know this as well, is that sentences it's a red herring anyway. Sentencing, stupid thing to talk about. The criminal justice system is under so much pressure that most cases are never heard, of this kind especially, never heard. Doesn't matter what the sentence is if you're never convicted, does it? Because these sorts of attacks against women have a very low prosecution rate. That was brought up earlier as well. And it's due to many reasons, but one of those reasons is that cases keep getting put back because the government have closed courtrooms. They cannot, the criminal justice system now cannot cope with the number of cases that come before it. And every time the government criminalise new activities, or toughen the sentence for them, it puts extra pressure on the criminal, prosecutions, the Crown Prosecution Service, sorry. So but if your case keeps getting put back, it's very hard on the victim. It's very traumatic. If you are actually a victim, it's very traumatic, the court case anyway, and then you gee yourself up for it and then it's put back. And it carries on for years for some of these people. It's years of your life where you can't move on, and for many of them, they just end up dropping the whole thing. And that's the ones who were believed and the prosecution was going to go ahead in the first place. But they give up because they're mentally broken. But you can't have this conversation with the public because it's too complicated for them. So we have to talk about laws and sentencing. So Starmer finished off after debunking Johnson's claims with a return to that sombre mood of cross-party cooperation and asked, look, Prime Minister, will you actually meet with me and my team to work on a bill that would have cross-party support to make a difference? I've got my experience. We've got these proposals. What about it? Little meeting, eh? Little meeting. So I was on tenterhooks, wasn't I? Would Boris Johnson waffle on about, of course I'm happy to hear ideas, but I don't really need to meet you? Or would he actually agree to meet them? Or would he just blather on about his bill and make up a load of other things that it supposedly does, none of which is actually contained in the text, knowing full well that Starmer cannot come back at him? Yeah, you guessed it. He wanted his grandstanding moment. He does it every week. Always does it every week. Stands up and talks a load of rubbish, knowing full well that Starmer can't put him down. He even doubled down on the lie already exposed. And this is why I'm not... See, on one hand, I look at it and I think, I don't think Starmer closed down Johnson with it. The ploy didn't have that real impetus, which is not a criticism because I can't think of a way it would have had impetus, so I can't come up with a better way of having phrased it, and I suspect there wouldn't be one. But I think the reason probably why, on balance, you would say it was a sensible ploy to take is I suspect the view was taken, no matter what Starmer had have asked, Johnson was going to bang on about his bill anyway and how Labour weren't voting for it. Trying to use it as a stick to beat Labour with. So Starmer said, well, we have to call out the lies for people listening so that they're aware that this doesn't actually toughen sentencing for these crimes. So that was what it did. Did it do the job? Yes, it did. But of course, Johnson doesn't mind lying. he will tell the same lies that you've just exposed, heedless of how it makes him look to those who see the truth. He doesn't win votes from people who see the truth anyway. So I guess he's comfortable with that. Ian Blackford for the SNP, then he used his PMQs to highlight the difference between what the Scottish government are doing and what the British government are doing. You know, thus using Johnson as the best weapon for independence. He pointed out that the Scottish government have been implementing a child-centred piece of legislation, not sure what that's about, but Johnson's mob were denying children school meals. But he could still afford to spend billions on extra nuclear weapons. I mean, there was no question really, even the second one. It was just shoring up support for independence, and I think especially the SNP. I think that's what it was mostly about. They've had a tough few weeks. Elections coming, really important. Fair enough, really. I mean, PMQs is party politics. That's what it's all about. Johnson is like an easy sort of support, isn't he, for the SNP? It amazes me that anyone can think that the Conservatives are fit for government anywhere in this country. But the Tories don't even bother to try and engage with most Scottish voters. And so most can see it. So if you're having it's like the Conservatives accept the fact that they'll get a few seats, they'll do all right, and they're doing better than Labour, but they'll never win Scotland, so they just don't bother. So if you're having a bad time, all the SNP have to do is point to the Conservatives and say, well, okay, we may have messed some things up, or there may be these things you don't like, but the alternative is those guys. Do you want those guys? You don't want those guys. And it works on a few levels, but the SNP ultimately want every vote they can get ahead of the elections this May, because for them, the difference between having a majority of one MSP and being one MSP short is huge for their plans. And some vote for the SNP even though they don't support independence. You know, some SNP voters will vote against independence. In Scotland, the alternative to the SNP is sadly the Conservatives, and that's what this was all about. Labour are nowhere right now anyway. So that's what this was about. An easy run out for Blackford. It was quite low energy. I mean, I'm not saying he's exactly bouncing off the walls for this one. It was just delivering lines. He pointed at the priorities that will chime with most voters will approve of. He knew full well that Johnson would come back at him by attacking those same priorities that actually a lot of voters will agree with. And Johnson duly did, thus shoring up support for the SNP again. Johnson really is the SNP's best campaigner, isn't he? All Ian Blackford has to do if he wants to get a bit more support back home is just poke at Johnson. There you are. Say a thing. Don't care what it is. Open your mouth. Say a thing. Thanks very much. We've gone up in the polls again. Bloody annoying, but there it is. So a somewhat muted PMQs from both of the two main opposition leaders. Nothing out of the ordinary. Johnson is losing us the union, but he's comfortable enough in his own position for now. Nothing that happened yesterday will have changed that or even move away from that. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.